The world is in a much more risky condition, if you look at it like a patient, than it has been at any time for the last decade, I think, at the moment. In the 1990s, everyone thought that, peace and freedom and democracy and human rights were going to become the universal norm. And now some of the countries, the regimes that were threatened by that, and some of the worldviews that were threatened by that, are fighting back against the idea that that is the only way to be. And those two forces are now fighting against each other, and it's become violent in the Middle East, and that could spread to many different parts of the world.
Obviously, the growth of ISIS in the Levant has caused real security worries and has proved to be a very powerful recruiting sergeant for terrorists around the world. I think if you couple the threat of ISIS and those lone wolf attacks that we're seeing more and more now, couple that with the growing sophistication of cybercrime, I think it's a fairly toxic mess and makes it more dangerous.
The world is more dangerous than it was 5 years ago, sadly. The threat from terrorism is significantly higher now than it was then. And some countries like Russia and China, are behaving in ways that are changing the whole global order and changing it in ways that considerably increase the risk.
Statistically, historically, death tolls are going down in conflicts, but obviously the nature of war is changing and there's less of a distinction between combatant and non-combatant. So journalists, doctors are often targeted more in war zones now. And also more broadly, there are more attacks in civilian cities across the world, as we saw in Paris recently.
I think the world is a more dangerous place than it was 5 years ago, although in some ways for good reasons. The Arab Spring that happened in 2011 was the equivalent of numerous different Berlin Walls falling down, and whenever you get a situation like that, you always get fluidity, you always get extremists rising to the top. It may seem like a very chaotic period we're going through at the moment, but hopefully it is for the better if it gets rid of these dictators and gives people ideas about freedom and democracy and so on.
It's not necessarily more dangerous, it's just that we know a lot more about what is happening in the world. So if you look at the early part of the 20th century, for instance, there was horrific things happening there, but we just weren't so aware of them. When you look at the world wars, atrocities are being carried out on an epic scale, but it took decades for it to be found out properly. So I think now we have much more instant knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the world is any more dangerous than it was at another time.
If you look at the macro statistics, access to healthcare and education, we've never had it so good. If you look at the geopolitics, we are entering a period of chronic instability. We have existential crises in Europe, we have uncertainty in America, Obama leading from behind, we've got a newly bellicose Russia and a rising China, uncertainty in the Asia Pacific. I think we're entering a period of instability, the like of which we've not seen certainly since the end of the Cold War.